Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be talking about B58 fuel upgrades. I basically want to use this video to put all of my perspectives out there on the different fuel upgrades that are currently available. I know a lot of you guys have seen my previous videos where I talked about some of the latest products that are coming to the market, and you guys have been blowing me up with a bunch of questions. You want to know which fuel pump is best, which one would I go with? And probably the most common question I've received over the past several weeks is, does port injection still make sense? Or should you stick with direct injection when you're looking for more power? And so I think I have kind of a unique perspective on that, and I just kind of wanted to share that with you guys. And we'll go through all of the different fuel upgrades that are available and kind of the order that I would go through to upgrade my fuel system. So hopefully you guys find this video useful.
Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future.
Now, before we jump into this, I do want to just make sure we all get baselined on the same level here. The first thing I want to mention is I'm going to be talking about ethanol a lot in this video. For those of you that don't know, E85 is a great way to boost the octane of your fuel, but it is also more stressful on your fuel system. So overall, it will support less power as you increase your ethanol content. Now, there is a balance there where you want good octane and good fuel quality, but also good fuel flow. Usually that's somewhere around 30 to 50% ethanol, also known as E30 to E50. So if I refer to an ethanol mix, that's what I'm talking about. But outside of that, running just straight pump gas will support more power, and running full E85 will support less power just from a fuel flow perspective. So just keep that in mind. That's where I'm coming from as I talk about the different numbers you can expect with these fuel upgrades. Another thing I want to mention is that majority of you might be watching this because of all the recent fuel upgrades that have come out. Keep in mind, they've been on the market for maybe like 2 weeks. A lot of people haven't even received their orders yet. So we're going to base this information on, the notes and details that have been provided by the companies that are making the parts. I like to wait a little while, at least 6 months or so for people to really vet out these products and run them through the ringer, try them on different setups so that we get a better idea of how reliable they are and how capable they are. We're working with companies that have been in the B58 space for several years, so they've done a good job of working out their bugs, but we still just want to give it a little more time. So definitely follow their social media, join our Facebook groups, do what you can to keep up with us and see how these things are progressing, just to make sure we all know what products work, and if any issues come up, you can at least be aware. But I know a lot of you are impatient. Black Friday is coming up in a couple months, and you guys are saving up your money trying to decide where you're going to spend it. So let's go ahead and talk about the information that we do know. So like I said, we'll go in the order that these fuel upgrades typically run out of fuel. And the lowest hanging fruit is that little fuel pump that could, the stock Gen 1 B58 high pressure fuel pump. Now, it works really well. I mean, overall, it is a very reliable pump and it supports a lot of power. Most people see it tap out around 420 to 440 wheel horsepower on an ethanol mix with the stock turbo. Now, you have to run ethanol with it to get as much power as you can on the stock turbo, just so that you can get that extra knock resistance. But on a bigger turbo, you could make more power on pump gas, but nobody really does that. So we don't really have good data on how much power it can support on just, 93 octane. In theory, it's somewhere around 450 to 500 wheel horsepower, but again, nobody really pushes that. Pretty much everybody goes ahead and upgrades their fuel pump for that kind of setup. But for most people, you can expect it to support around 420 to 440 wheel horsepower. Now, the next step up from here is the stock B58 TU high pressure fuel pump. This is the factory fuel pump that is on all Gen 2 B58s. So those are the engines in your A90 Supras, your M340is, M440is, basically all of the late model BMWs. Now, there's a little bit of overlap here. BMW started putting the TU engine in BMWs as soon as 2019, and they were using Gen 1 B58s as late as 2021. So it kind of depends on what vehicle you're talking about. There's not like a clear year cutoff or date cutoff where they switched over. But if you have, for example, a Supra, whether it's 2-port or 6-port, it's still a TU engine. It still comes with the B58 TU high pressure fuel pump. So that TU pump is not an upgrade for you. And I still see some people kind of confusing that or thinking that they need to upgrade it. But this is the stock fuel pump on those late model B58s. So for everybody else like me, if you have a Gen 1 B58, it's a nice plug and play upgrade. And even for the people that have it from the factory, it supports a lot of power. I've seen typically around 550 to 600 wheel horsepower on an ethanol mix with a bigger turbo. Again, on pump gas, it can support more power. I've seen a handful of people make more. There are a couple cars that made just a little bit over 600 on 93 octane, but that's like really good quality fuel. You'll even see tuners say that they're surprised to see those results when they put it on the dyno, because that's definitely not typical. But if you have good quality fuel, it's definitely possible. And also, of course, if you have race gas, you can support plenty of power. I think Jackie Ding was making a little over 650 on just the factory fuel system with race gas, and he was using like an AMS big turbo kit. So yeah, it's definitely a very capable fuel system. You just need to work around your fuel limits. You know, if you have poor quality fuel, that's when you're definitely going to want to add some ethanol so that you can get it, to that 550 or so range. Now, moving up from there, you have more options to upgrade your high pressure fuel pump. The two main companies that people order from are Dorch Engineering and Spool Performance. Both of them have a stage 1 and stage 2 option for your Gen 1 B58. So if you're looking at Dorch, you can either get a DS15-250 or a DS25-250. And these are upgrades from their former Dorch Stage 1 and Dorch Stage 2 high-pressure fuel pumps. From Spool Performance, they have also replaced their former Stage 1 and Stage 2 fuel pumps. So it used to be an FX150 and an FX180. Now it is called an FX170 and an FX200. Now I think most people are going to go for the Stage 2 options, and both of them seem to be able to flow a similar amount of fuel. So on an ethanol mix, you can expect them to support around 750 wheel horsepower, which is about 50 wheel horsepower more than their old Stage 2 high pressure fuel pump options. So they have reworked it a little bit, and it seems like it can definitely support an additional 50 horsepower or so, depending on your tuning and your turbo. Now, the good news is we also have high pressure fuel pump upgrades available for the Gen 2 B58. So if you have an A90 Supra and you want to get a Dorch pump, you will want to order the DS25-350 because that is designed for 350 bar fuel systems. And then we also have the new Spool Performance FX350, and that again is going to be designed for the TU engine. Now the flow of these is similar to the Gen 1 Stage 2 high pressure fuel pump options. They're just designed to flow at a higher pressure, so you're not going to necessarily see bigger gains by trying to put this on your Gen 1 B58. This is just a similar pump that's designed for the higher pressure fuel system that we see on the TU engines. Now, the only downside here is to see that full 750 wheel horsepower, you're going to need to upgrade your injectors. We actually see the injector limits being hit on both of these high pressure fuel pumps. On a Gen 1 B58, your injectors seem to be limited to around 700 wheel on an ethanol mix. So what you're going to want to do is, if you want that full 750, you're going to need to pair your high pressure fuel pump upgrade with an injector upgrade as well. The same thing is true for the Gen 2 B58, and unfortunately your injector limit is even lower than the Gen 1. So you're going to hit the injector limit around 650 wheel, again on an ethanol mix. And so if you want to get between 650 and 750 to really push the limits of your high pressure fuel pump upgrade, you're going to need to pair that with an injector upgrade as well. There are a couple different options out there. XDI is making some, as well as Spool Performance. They have their new IFX line of injector upgrades, so more should be coming. Dorch Engineering, I believe, will be making some as well. But those fuel injector upgrades will be what allows you to truly see the limits of your high pressure fuel pump. Now, also keep in mind that feeding your entire fuel system is your low pressure fuel pump. And these pumps are extremely capable on our cars, but they also seem to be limited to around 700 wheel horsepower on that ethanol mix. So what you're going to want to do is upgrade that as well. There are a lot of pumps out there. Most of them have a secondary pump that sits outside of the factory basket, and that pump runs off a trigger to add additional fuel when you get into high boost scenarios. So that's a really popular setup. It's pretty simple to run, and that's the one that I use. I know there are other versions that are supposed to be drop-in, but I've seen mixed results on those, so I don't typically recommend that. I think the pumps that have the secondary fuel pump outside of the basket are not only more reliable, but they also support more power. So that's typically the route that I recommend. Now, after that, there's really only one other upgrade that you can do, and that is a cam upgrade. The exhaust cam has a lobe on it that actually drives your high pressure fuel pump. And by increasing the size of that lobe, you're going to increase the stroke of your pump, which effectively increases the amount of fuel that your fuel pump can flow. So this is really key to getting past that 750 wheel horsepower barrier, because now with the cam upgrade, you're going to be able to flow the 1,000 wheel horsepower that your injectors and your low pressure fuel pump can flow. Now, unfortunately, this is a little bit more difficult to install. It requires some unique timing tools and just a little bit more time. So I don't know a lot of people that have gone down this route yet, but it seems like a lot of people are definitely interested, because that allows you to make crazy amounts of power without port injection. You just stick with the direct injection system and you're able to make, like I said, 900, or in some cases it's rated for even 1,000 wheel horsepower. So time will tell. We haven't seen anybody push it that far. I think the highest dyno I've seen so far is 860 wheel horsepower, but the capability is definitely there. It makes sense that it would work. So now we're just waiting for more people to push it and see where that new limit will be. The last thing we'll talk about is kind of the tried and true port injection. And you guys pretty much should already know how this works. Instead of trying to upgrade the factory direct injection system, you're going to add 6 additional injectors that spray into the ports on your cylinder head. Now this turns it into a more conventional style fuel system, because that's how older fuel systems ran. They just had port injectors in the intake manifold that would spray over the valves. And the nice thing about this is you can simply upgrade those injectors to any off-the-shelf option. Mine on my car is 750 cc, but they make them over 1,000 cc's of fuel flow, and it can support a crazy amount of power. I would say pretty much the headroom is unlimited. It's really just up to you to pick what size injectors you want to use. So it's a nice upgrade that a lot of people still use to this day to just bypass the limits of the direct injection system and get that extra fuel that you'll need. Keep in mind, your low pressure fuel pump still needs to be upgraded at that 700 wheel horsepower level, because it's supplying both your direct injection system and your port injection system when you add that. But it's just a really nice way to set yourself with unlimited headroom, so you'll never have to upgrade anything else. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can implement this. The most common one is the spacer plate. It's going to be sandwiched between your cylinder head and your intake manifold and mount the injectors there. My favorite one is the Precision Raceworks version, because that has all 6 injectors spraying in the exact same location, so that you're getting nice, even fuel distribution across all of the cylinders. There are others as well, but most of them spray like at the cylinder walls on cylinder 6. And so that means that the cylinder 6 might not get the same fuel distribution, which we all know cylinder 6 is a little more susceptible to having issues and potentially getting damaged. So I prefer using a spacer plate that I know has all the injectors evenly distributed. Now, beyond that, of course, you can upgrade your intake manifold to one that has port injectors. And you can see I have the Autowerks intake manifold. There are a lot of different versions out there, but these are basically the best way to implement it, because now the injectors aren't spraying up into the air path. They're actually spraying directly into the ports. So now you're going to get more fuel directly where you want it. It's going to clean the valves more effectively. It's going to get better atomization, better burn. Overall, it's just a better setup. Unfortunately, the intake manifolds are pretty expensive, so that's why most people go with the spacer plates, because it works just as well. But if you want the absolute best way to implement port injection, then you're going to want to go with that intake manifold upgrade. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Does port injection even make sense? If you can support 900 wheel horsepower with a direct injection system, why would you go with port? Direct injection is a system on our cars that is used in the modern day because it is extremely efficient. You're going to make more power for the same amount of fuel flow. It's going to be more reliable. It's going to maintain all of your factory safeties. You don't need any auxiliary controllers or sensors or integrations with your tune for it to work. It just works. And so that is something that I think a lot of people are seeing as a big advantage now that we're getting these upgrades that literally allow you to build your car to the moon. The only thing that I think a lot of people aren't considering is not just the cost of the parts, but the cost of supporting mods.
And I just realized I forgot to explicitly mention it here, but yes, fully upgrading your direct injection system is going to be more expensive than going port injection. So if you do a fuel pump and cams and an injector, it's going to be around $5,000 versus a port injection spacer and a motive reflex, it'll be closer to $2,000. So it really just depends on your goals. You know, going with a high pressure fuel pump upgrade is pretty cost effective, but beyond that, it's going to be a lot more expensive to make the same power.
The only thing that I think a lot of people aren't considering is not just the cost of the parts, but the cost of supporting mods. So for example, in the Gen 1 B58, the default upgrade path is downpipe, fuel pump, turbo. You do those three things and you're easily able to achieve around 650 wheel horsepower, safe for the engine, safe for the stock transmission, and it just works, you know. I think we've been spoiled by that because now people are seeing these upgrades that are still allowing us to easily make more power, but after that point, the cost can become exponentially more expensive. So for example, your stock transmission is not going to be very happy above 600 foot-pounds of torque. A lot of people know your sixth gear starts to slip, and I know some people push a lot of power in like fourth and fifth gear, and then they just limit it in sixth gear to save the transmission, but that's not really the best way to do it. And there are other components that are at risk, especially if you do drag racing and stuff. You know, you don't want something that just breaks your transmission and leaves you stranded. So that can easily be a 4 to 5 figure investment just to upgrade that. And again, on the engine side, you know, when you're pushing over 700 wheel horsepower, it becomes extremely risky. People keep referencing cars that are pushing crazy amounts of power on the stock engine, but it's not very typical. There are a lot of people that blow their engines in that range. The downside is a lot of people don't see it, so they assume that they can get that far, and then they damage something to the point where they can't even just build their block. They need to buy an engine and build a separate one to swap it into their car. So again, that ends up being like a 5-figure investment just to get your car to handle the power that you were so easily able to achieve. And so I think that's a big problem. You know, I just want people to really understand what's happening when you push past these limits, because for all intents and purposes, the Dorch Stage 2 and the FX180 were effectively able to max out your stock transmission and your stock engine. Anything that you do to push beyond that, in my opinion, is a risk that you're taking on, and I think most tuners would agree with that. You know, there's nothing wrong with trying to push it. It might last a year, it might last 2 years. A lot of people that are pushing crazy power don't run it at that power all the time. You know, they just do it for racing on weekends and stuff like that. But, you know, there's just no real telling how long it'll last. Whereas the B58 is really pretty well proven to support 600 to 650 wheel horsepower reliably. So that's something that I think a lot of people should consider. These supporting mods that you're going to need to take advantage of all these fuel upgrades can stack up. Another common thing that I see people saying is even if you upgrade, you know, your cams and your fuel pump and your injectors, you're still probably going to want a manifold to replace the plastic one, you know, and so at that point you're still spending thousands of dollars on an intake manifold where you're not using the port injectors in it. Now you don't have to, you know, you can still maintain, like I said, all the safeties and benefits that come with sticking with direct injection, but you're going to have, you know, the support for it anyway. So in my opinion, port injection still makes sense. It's really more about where your priorities lie. Are you focused on that additional safety and reliability that comes with direct injection, or do you just want the simplest and cheapest way to make that extra power? Another thing I want you guys to know is, like I said, the cams can be a little bit expensive and difficult to install. Our cars have a unique timing chain setup because everything is sandwiched between the transmission and the engine. So you'll want a qualified shop to install that, and just the labor costs, again, can add a little bit more to it. So you really need to be committed to sticking to the direct injection system if you want to go that route. That's basically what I'm saying. So yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums up my thoughts. Hopefully over the years, you know, some of the prices of these components go down. I'm sure we'll start seeing used parts come up on the market as well. I think another point that a lot of people were wondering is if the upgraded injectors are more reliable than the stock injectors. So again, we'll give it a little bit of time and see if we can get any feedback or thoughts on that. But overall, I think more options never hurt. I think it's great for people that really didn't want port injection, but they did want to build their car. You know, if you're already going to be pulling your engine to build it for 800 horsepower, why not do a cam upgrade that maximizes the performance of your fuel pump? You know, stuff like that does make sense. So, you know, hopefully we see more people really pushing this direct injection system and these new upgrades that we've seen on the market so we can see what it's truly capable of. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below. So this is really key to getting past that 750 wheel horsepower barrier, because now your fuel pump's going to be able to support 1,000 plus wheel horsepower. So these flow similar. So this is really key to get past that 700.